Okay, cartography in a nutshell. We could honestly spend a whole semester talking about the importance of maps and science communication, but we're going to crank it out in two parts here. Okay, first of all, why? Why do we care about the appearance of maps? There's nothing wrong with the map I'm showing you here. It's a dot density map where each dot represents 5,000 hogs, but it's clearly outdated. It was clearly created in a time of just regular printing. There's nothing catchy or interesting about this map. And then, you get the web tearing it to shreds and saying things like untapped infinite hog supply in the ocean, or each state is lined with an impenetrable wall of swine. We're trapped. So, we have to keep up with the times. Perspectives change, and we want to be able to communicate our science effectively. Mostly because you want to garner attention for your works of genius, not to just be fodder for a catty online audience. An ugly map with crude colors, careless line work, and disagreeable, poorly arranged lettering may be intrinsically as accurate as a beautiful map, but it's less likely to inspire confidence. I don't know who John K. Wright is, and it doesn't matter. He hit the nail right on the head. That's what it's all about. It's about inspiring confidence and being taken seriously. But, along the lines of changing perspectives, things have changed. This is a graphic illustration of the meanders of the Mississippi River. Harold Fiske in the 1940s manually mapped the Mississippi from Indiana to the Gulf, and not just the Mississippi, but the history of its migration pattern. He took 3 years, walked the floodplains, collected data, and did a very detailed survey of sediment cores, and exposed 2,000 years of river activity. If you know the program Radiolab, Robert Krulwich called it a twisted timeline of rainbow ribbons, basically tracing the historical stages of the Mississippi River. But you get up in an airplane and you get a whole different perspective, don't you? I mean, you don't have to walk the floodplains and take sediment cores. We're able to get a completely different perspective just with elevation. But you can't see everything. This is another example, exact same scale and extent in both maps. But on the right, we can see a beautifully illustrated elevation model, and on the left, a satellite image. You'd never even notice the confluence and the crazy channels that are forming between these two rivers. A little tiny bit, but that's really lost here. Anyway, just something to keep in mind. I think it's important to think about maps, both as a way of communicating scientific results and art. Maps have a lot of power. They can engage an audience, they can help find new audiences, convey information, tell a story, help make sense of otherwise complicated or very unapproachable data. Here's another very mainstream, relatively old-fashioned looking map. We can see tornado locations, and the intensity of the tornado is encoded in the size and color of the symbol itself. Nothing wrong with this map. It's a good look at data. This is the exact same data set, but we're able to leverage it with new cartography tools, glowing symbology. Here we can take the vector, we can take the direction and duration fields into consideration and actually map the track. We can build data density and complexity into the map by adding injury and death information over time. This takes a lot of work, and that work takes a lot of time, and I think the question is it worth it? And I don't even know that worth it is the right question. It's just fundamental. It's a fundamental part of being a scientist today, is to be able to professionally share your results. We're such a media-driven culture now, and being able to communicate your science is very important. I use this map all the time as an example because it's so heartbreaking. The artist here, the cartographer, is not a cartographer. This is a hobby, and the artist, his name is Rick Ashman. He is somebody who likes to study dialects and pronunciations and built this map from scratch, not being a cartographer at all. So it's very easy to pick on this map because it is kind of a mess, but it also represents a lifetime of passion and work. And I think that's what's so heartbreaking, is that it's just trying to do too much. Look at the title. Can you even find the title? It might be North American English Pronunciation, Dialects Based on Patterns, but it's not. It's North American English Dialects Based on Pronunciation Patterns. Splitting it up and having it span Ellesmere Island is a really interesting idea, but these are all cartographic choices that we have to make, and the idea is, how can you tell your story as compellingly as possible? Your goal is to convey information clearly. And maybe there's just too much that's trying to be done in this map. And this is a zoom in just to show you the amount of work that was put into this. I mean, this is not to be taken lightly. It's not a joke by any means. This is an incredible undertaking. And I wish I had, the skills to help improve it, because it's definitely a worthy cause. Again, you want your work to get attention for its positive merits and for the message it's trying to convey. So here, let's run through the quick overview outline of what we're going to talk about with cartography. Purpose. Define a clear intended message for your map, and then focus. Your layout should have clear alignments, margins, and a strong visual hierarchy and intellectual hierarchy, and we'll talk about that in a second. The symbology. Leverage the human's natural intuition and our ability to rank things to create intuitive symbology that's effective and easy to read. Colors should be used wisely. It should be used in a limited way, and should relate to the base map to help boost your symbology. And then finally, text. Text and base maps need to provide adequate context, spatial context and context for your map's message. And above all else, don't lie. So let's pick these apart a little bit. One trick is to start your map by focusing on the specific message. Delete everything else that doesn't support your main message. Focus every element on the page to support your purpose. That's kind of the overarching way to clean up your map. Number 2, create some structure. On the left is an example of a page with 0 hierarchy. We've got 3 groups, and that's about it. But on the right, you can see we're starting to create some pockets of things that are more interesting, places that our eyes can rest a little bit. We're breaking up the information into smaller bites. Remember that in our society, we read top to bottom, left to right. So think about those locations on the page as prime real estate. So on the right is a better example of hierarchy, where we have a strong band on the top. We're using color to draw attention to something that's a little bit smaller. This could maybe even be broken up more, but you don't want to open up your page, top and left, with just a big mass of poorly organized information, visually or intellectually. So take a look at these 4 examples. They're all fine examples of kind of map page layouts. But just notice that alignments are clear. Even if everything has the same contrast against the base map, we still have a semblance of hierarchy. We've got a group at the top, a group here, and then these 2 are kind of grouped together. By increasing contrast, we start saying this is the most important. Hey, look, we also put it at the top of the page, and that's how we tend to read. The low contrast reduces this element's hierarchy. Notice that these 2 have the same contrast against the base, but because this one's smaller, it should be maybe less important. Plus, we put it a little bit lower on the page, but the white surrounding it increases the contrast, or at least gives the impression that the contrast is increasing, and so it kind of maintains its importance. So there's a lot of psychology that goes into graphic design and layout. These are things to keep in mind. And I give this list to you as a reference as well. Each one of these is really important. They're all tricks that are, visual rules of thumb. Users notice larger elements more easily. That should be pretty obvious. Bright colors typically attract more attention than muted ones. Dramatically contrasting colors are more eye-catching, so make sure you're using color and contrast very deliberately. You can put things out of alignment to get them to grab your reader's attention. Closely grouping things together makes elements seem related. Putting space around elements draws the eye toward them. These are some of the things we've talked about, but just for your reference, this is a good list to keep in mind. So just another example of visual contrast. Notice that the black on the white draws your eye more than the blue on the white because the contrast is stronger. So even though it's lower on the page, this one does attract more attention. You can always squint at your maps or your graphs to really see what things are the easiest to read and what elements are jumping out at you. Those are the highest hierarchy, and they should be the highest intellectual hierarchy as well, the things that have the most meaning to your map. The same thing goes with type against the base. Be really careful when you're using colors that are kind of equal intensity but opposite on the color wheel. You get a lot of vibration and buzzing, and it looks kind of blurry. Plus, there's no hierarchy. The foreground and the background are very similar. Here, the foreground and background are very similar, but they're more unified colors. This is a way to decrease attention to things. So, for example, I've always suggested that you take your data credits or map author or annotations and footnotes or even a subtitle. And if you make it gray on white, whereas the main text is black on white, it's going to lay back and be a little bit less visually important. High contrast is the easiest to read and is going to draw your eye. So remember that it's not just within your map that you need to apply visual hierarchy. It's also how your map sits on the overall page or the layout, combined with the title or legends, scale. They all need to work together. And then we have to take another step and make sure that the web page also has some hierarchy to it. And just to keep in mind that page balance matters. When things are divided in half, it's been shown that these aren't as interesting to look at, whereas if you just offset a little bit, you've instantly created hierarchy and the design is more appealing. Okay, so some things to consider. This has to do with scale, but if you think about showing two polygons, on a map like this, where the goal or the point is to show its location relative to landmarks for context. So in this case, you'd want to fill the polygons and use a more graphic map with details that are appropriate for this scale, labels of cities, roads, etc. But if you zoom in on the polygons, now we're interested in their local setting. And so switching to a satellite image is a really nice idea, and making the polygons transparent or even hollow filled, because we're interested in these two locations and what's happening within these polygons. And then just another example of the squint test. Remember that when you're employing symbology to a feature, a set of features on a map, especially a graduated color ramp, you want to think about drawing your audience's attention to the features that matter the most. And the ones that are going to be visually most appealing are the ones with the highest contrast against the base map. So if you squint at this, you'll see that the yellow one is vivid and lighter. These two are also lighter, but there's a vividness to the yellow that really makes this one stand out, where the blue really disappears if you squint. That has to do with contrast and use of color. This one also sticks out quite a bit too. On the other hand, if you use a lighter base map, you're going to want to change your symbology to draw your attention to the features that you want people to notice. And so in this case, you might want to go for darker colors and let the less important features be lighter, less contrast. Okay. And finally, think about how maps and graphics are disputable. They're objective, and so as much as you need to be a critical map reader and critical about taking things at face value, you also want to be just as careful conveying information to other people, right? This was a set of maps that kind of hit the Twitter realm when we were experiencing all the wildfires in Australia. Australia is on fire and has been over 6 months. It's getting worse. that was all very true, but this makes it look like most of the country is on fire, right? And then there were the maps that overlaid the fires of Australia on the United States or on Europe and really made it look like, look at, this is how bad it would be in the United States if we were to superimpose this map. What's wrong with that message? What's wrong with the way this data is being interpreted, or maybe even symbolized? You know, each one of these little symbols is representing a really, really small place on the map. If you mapped the actual area of each fire at this scale, you wouldn't even see them. This is not to downplay the importance of these fires or, you know, the extreme nature of these fires. This was another one that really took over. Stunning map. It makes Australia look like a burning ember, right? And that we've taken these polygons and given them that firefly kind of treatment, which makes them look like actual fires. But the problem is that the size of the areas that are being represented is terribly exaggerated. And so it makes it look like so much more of the continent is on fire than it actually is. The problem with the symbology being so realistic is that it's too easy to misinterpret it. This showed up on the PolitiFact Truthometer as, you know, almost liar, liar, pants on fire. Stunning, absolutely impeccably, gorgeously stunning, but sadly, really over-representing the size of the fires. Okay, if you haven't read these two books, I highly recommend them. They're so good. How to Lie with Maps is a classic. It's been around forever. It's a super narrative read. You can knock it out in a day. I'm pretty sure they have it at the library, and I've got a copy in my office if anyone's interested. This is a new book by Alberto Cairo, How Charts Lie. It also talks about maps. Totally awesome read. You'll absolutely love it. I have a copy of this in my office as well if anyone wants to check it out. Okay, hang on for part 2.